hypothetically speaking, what if I were to go away for a year on a trip? And before I left, I would give you $100,000. And as I gave you that money, I would say, I'd like you to manage that money while I'm gone. Manage that for me. And then when I come back, we'll have a conversation about how you managed that money for me. Now, before you think you're getting a check on your way out, I said hypothetically. But how would you respond to that? Would your first inclination be, okay, well, what shopping trip am I going on? Or Hawaii sounds nice right now, or anything like that? You wouldn't start immediately thinking how you were going to spend that money on yourself. I would assume that if you're a logical person, I would assume that you would want to know some things, that you would want to know, okay, well, what do you want done with the money? Is there a specific goal you have in mind? Do you want me to, double the money in a year, or increase it by a certain percentage, or invest it in a certain way? What you would have all of these questions about what I wanted done while I was gone. And you would hope to, at some point, you would hope that you would benefit from you managing that money for the year. You would hope that you would reap some kind of reward for that. But at the end of the day, you wouldn't try to figure out how you were going to spend that money on yourself. And that's kind of what Jesus asks us to do with the money He's entrusted to us. He actually says that we should approach our money in the same way. We should not approach our money, our finances, in a way where we own our money, we own our finances. We should approach it in a way in which we are managing our money. We are managing actually His money that He's entrusted to us. That we should approach our money like a manager. That's what Jesus says we should do. That's the approach He says we should take in terms of how we should manage and how we should approach the mindset we should take when it comes to our money. Now, I know there's some pushback because your paycheck, or your name is on the paycheck, and you earned it, you worked for it, some of you worked really hard for it, and it's your money, and you should get to decide what you do with your money, right? And we say that, it's my money. But Jesus says we should take a different approach. He says that everything we have comes from Him. And so if everything we have comes from Him, well, that includes the money we have. And according to Jesus, He says that we should approach things as if we are managing the money He has entrusted to us. And if we adopt that mindset, well, that's different than, hey, I own this, I deserve this, it's all mine and meant for me. And anytime I get an increase, I just think, well, how am I going to spend that extra that I have now? How am I going to spend that on me? But Jesus says we should take the opposite approach. We should take the approach of, okay, Jesus, if I'm a follower of Jesus, then Jesus, you've entrusted this money to me, so how do you want me to manage it? What does that look like for you? And so to kind of get us all going on this, I'm going to read some statements for us to self-evaluate, to see how we're doing. To self-evaluate to see, are we approaching our finances in terms of being a manager, or are we approaching our finances in terms of being an owner? So I hope you're ready. Here we go. If you spend more money than you make in a year, you might be approaching your money as if you're an owner. Or if you don't know if you're spending more money than you make in a year, or if you don't care that you spend more money than you make in a year. If that's you, then you may be approaching your finances as if you're an owner, not a manager. If you owe more on your car than your car is worth, then you may be an owner, not a manager. Or if you carry credit card debt from month to month. Or how about this one? If paying the monthly minimum on your credit card is normal. Or If you think paying the monthly minimum on your credit card is good financial planning, you might be approaching your finances as if you're an owner instead of a manager. Now, if that's you, that's okay if that's been your approach, because oftentimes we just model, or we just approach things as it was modeled for us. The household we grew up in, or whatever, the friends we have, if that's how they approach things, if that's how they do things, or that's how mom and dad did things, then that's oftentimes how I'm going to approach things. So if that's been your approach, well, then perhaps today it's time for a mindset shift. It's time for a shift to go from I own this, I own all of this money, to I'm just a manager, and I am managing this money for God. How about this one? If you're making financial decisions you hope others don't discover? Or how about if you're making financial decisions you hope the IRS doesn't discover? Perhaps you have an ownership mindset rather than a manager mindset. Or if you worry often about money, perhaps you're worried because you think you own it all and you think it's all yours, and the assumption is it's all for your consumption. And if that's you and you're always worried about money, and can be true whether you have a little bit of money or whether you have a lot of money or whether you have somewhere in between, if you are constantly worried about money, then perhaps you're failing to realize that God has entrusted this to you and you're to be a manager, not an owner. And for those of you who are married, we got a couple of specific questions for you, or statements for you. And that is, if you fight frequently about money, perhaps you have an ownership mindset rather than a manager mindset. Or if you don't talk with your spouse about money, we got the two extremes here. You either don't ever say anything about money, or you constantly fight about it. If that's you, perhaps you're approaching things with an ownership mindset rather than a manager mindset. How about this one? If you don't prioritize giving a percentage of your income away. If you don't prioritize giving a percentage of your income away. You see, when we prioritize giving a percentage of our income, it's a reminder that we're no longer an owner, we're a manager. That's the approach that Jesus says we should take with our finances. Now, I know some of you here today, you're like, what in the world does this have to do with following Jesus? I thought this church was all about inspiring me to follow Jesus. Well, that's true, but Jesus talked a lot about money. In fact, he talked more about money than I think anything else in terms of a topic while he was here on this earth. And for Jesus made a correlation. In fact, there's a very strong connection between what is happening in our lives financially and what is happening in our lives spiritually. Jesus makes this connection. He says, if you want to follow me, well, there's a connection between following me and how you approach your finances. Because some of us, we want to separate the two. We want to separate, hey, this is my financial piece of life, and then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to follow Jesus. And I'm following Jesus and I'm doing the things he has me to do, but I'm going to keep my finances separate from that. But that's not how Jesus approached things. That's not what Jesus taught. Jesus says it's all about following me. Because there's such a connection between your finances and how you approach them and how you decide to follow me. Because if you're following me, I'm your Lord and Savior. I'm your King. I'm wanting you to submit and surrender to my authority. And that goes and includes your wallet. And so that's the approach that Jesus has. And he says that there's a connection between the two. And I know some of you grew up in a church where you tried to separate things. Some of you don't think we should be talking about money in church. And if that's you, the reason why we're doing that is because Jesus did that. And so just take it up with him, right? But Jesus is not the only one that talked about this. There was a guy named Paul who came along a little later. Initially, Paul was not a Jesus follower, and then he became a Jesus follower. And he wrote some letters to some churches and to some people about practically how do we follow Jesus. And so he worked all of that out. And one letter he wrote to a guy named Timothy. Now, Timothy was at this time the pastor of the church at Ephesus at that particular time. And what Paul writes to Timothy, he says, hey, here's some things to help you out and help you as you're trying to lead this church and pastor this church. And so in the midst of this letter to Timothy, as he's helping them out, he gives us some insight into practically what this looks like in terms of trying to go from a mindset of being an owner to being a manager. This is what Paul writes. He says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. He starts out, but in terms of, he's contrasting what he's just said. And what he's just said was, hey, Timothy, there's some teachers out there that I've heard about, and what they're teaching is that you can, they're trying to turn godliness into financial gain. And he says that's not the way Jesus says we should do it. That's not the approach that we should have. He says godliness, and that's just a big word for right belief leading to right behavior. Right belief, believing the right things about God and about how he says to do things, and then our behavior matching up with that belief. And so in terms of this, our right belief is that Jesus is king, and because Jesus is king, if I've decided to follow him, if I've decided to put my faith and trust in him and receive that forgiveness and do my best to live according to his teaching, well, that's a right belief. But then my behavior should match up to the teachings of Jesus. And in terms of this particular thing, that he is king, and not only is he king, but we should then, our finances should reflect that. Our finances should, the behavior with our finances should reflect the fact that he's the king and I'm the subject. That he's the king and I've surrendered and submitted to his lordship. That's the right belief and right behavior. And he says with that right belief and right behavior, with that godliness, as we seek to follow Jesus and live out the life that he wants us to live, he says with that, there can be contentment. There can be a peace. There can be a freedom from anxiety. Why? Because it's all his. And we've surrendered and submitted. We're no longer thinking of our finances as our own. We're just doing and managing what he has entrusted to us. And so when we shift that mindset, well, then there's this contentment that can come over us because we're trusting in him, and we can be free from all of that anxiety, and we can have peace in terms of with our life and peace in terms of our finances. See, with godliness, with contentment is great gain. He says it's great gain. It's not necessarily financial gain, but there's a benefit to your life if you approach your finances this way. That you will reap benefits, that there will be a peace that comes over you, that there will be just this freedom from anxiety. There will be all of these benefits if you decide to do your finances the way Jesus says to do your finances. If you decide to go from being an owner to a manager. And the reason for that is for we brought nothing into this world and we can take nothing out of it. He says, when we came into the world, we brought nothing with us. And when we're leaving this world, we're taking nothing with us. Because Paul believed that there was a life after this life. And those who've decided to follow Jesus, those who've accepted his forgiveness for what he has done for us, that we will live in eternity with Jesus. But we can't take anything with us. He says, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Now, what he's not saying is, he's not saying, if I don't have food and I don't have clothing, then I'm not content. Then I can just get up and complain all I want. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, he's contrasting this, having food and clothing. He's contrasting that with what we're about to talk about. You see, Paul had learned to be content, to have peace when Paul had nothing. There were times in other letters he wrote, there were times when he went hungry, that he didn't have anything to eat. And he said he had to learn to be content when he had nothing. And then Paul said in other letters that there were times in his life where he had a lot, that he had plenty, he had more than he needed, and he had learned to be content there. You see, contentment isn't having a certain amount. And once I get this certain amount, then I'll be all right. Paul says contentment is whether I have nothing or whether I have a lot or whether I have somewhere in the middle. My contentment is because it's not mine. I'm not the owner. All I'm doing is being a manager. So he contrasts with just having food and clothing to those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. You see, for those who want to get rich, he's contrasting that with having just food and clothing. There are people out there who want to get rich, and that leads them to harmful desires. That leads them to some things that aren't very good for them. Contrasting that to the benefit of approaching our finances, of going from an owner to a manager that Paul just talked about. He says, and the reason for that is, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Did you see that? There's the connection. The connection between following Jesus and our finances. He connects it to faith. And he says those who run after riches and who think they're the owner of everything, he says that can lead them down a path, down a destructive path, and lead them away from following Jesus. Because our finances are connected to our faith. There's a strong connection. And so he says, don't let that happen. Don't let chasing after money happen. Don't let that lead you away. Don't let that lead you astray. So if you take the mindset and shift it from being an owner to being a manager, well, then you're not chasing anything. All you're doing is managing. All you're doing is stewarding. Paul says that's the difference. That's how we go from shifting our mindset. Now, if you're here today and you're not a follower of Jesus, I just want to say I think this would be helpful for you. I think it would help you have healthier finances and a healthier approach, but that's completely up to you. But if here today you're a Jesus follower, I think it's so important that we make that connection. I think it's so important that not only do we submit our lives and submit ourselves to the teachings of Jesus, but we bring our wallet with us to that submission. That we change our mindset and we shift it from being an owner to being a manager. So a couple of things just to kind of put some more practical things to this idea. And we say it around here quite a lot. And so we say it this way. We say we want to give, save, and live. Right off the top, we want to give. We want to give, from the Jewish perspective, going way back before Jesus, they gave 10% right off the top. And so if you're here today and you're trying to make this mindset shift and you're trying to go from an owner to a manager, I would suggest giving 10% off the top. Just right there. Give it to God. That's what they did, and that's seemed to be the approach that Paul was telling to Timothy and that Timothy was teaching that local church in Ephesus. And so I think it would be beneficial for you as a follower of Jesus that you would give off the top to your local church, just like they did back then. And so if you're a regular attender here at 419, I'd want to encourage you. I think you should be supporting us at 419 as a local church. Now, if you're a guest with us here today, I'm not expecting you to be a part of that. But if you're a regular attender here and you're a Jesus follower, I think this should be part of your plan. Whether you're writing a check every week or whether you set it up to be come off out of your account automatically or whatever, we've got all that for you. But I think you should be doing that. Now, some of you here today, if you think that today's talk is just this last part right here where I'm just trying to get you to give here, then I would say That is not my agenda. Now, I hope you do. I think if you're a part of this church, I think you should. But if that is hard for you to do, then I would suggest you find a nonprofit out there that is doing kingdom work in this world and just give your top percentage there. And then we'll leave it at that. Now, this isn't something that I'm just saying. We as a church actually do this. We allocate 10% of our everything that comes in. We allocate 10% that goes outside the walls of this church. Things we're doing in the community and things we're doing outside of the community. We give away. So we're not just telling you to do something that we're not as a church willing to do ourselves. The second thing I want to encourage you to do is to save. As we go from shifting our idea from an owner to a manager, we give off the top, and then we need to save. We need to save for some unexpected expenses. Save for what's going to happen a month from now or 6 months from now or a year from now, because you never know what's going to happen. So we need to save some things for some unexpected expenses. We also need to be saving for our future retirement, because we're going to have some expenses once we stop working. And so we need to be saving for that. So give, save, and then live off the rest. Now, as we live off the rest, what does that look like? Well, Paul later on in this letter that we don't have time to look at, he says God has given us everything for our enjoyment. So we should be enjoying the rest that we have to live off of. However, we should do it with the fact that we're trying to follow Jesus. And we're trying to do it in the fact that he is the king and I'm the subject and I'm surrendered to him. And I want to be a part of his kingdom. And I want to be a part of extending his kingdom and expanding his kingdom and the things that he's doing in this world. So I want to be a part of that. So my finances should reflect that fact. Right belief, right behavior. A mindset shift from being an owner to a manager. So if you're here today and you were say you're a follower of Jesus, I think this can be a game changer for us. I think it could be a game changer for you if up until today you've been approaching things as if you own everything, that everything, the assumption is that everything is for your consumption. If you will make this shift, I think it will help you follow Jesus better, because there's a connection. There's a connection between our faith and our money. And if we will surrender our money, if we will make that mindset shift, well, that'll just help us follow Jesus better, because the way we manage our money matters. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for preserving these words. And God, I pray for each and every person here, if up until this point they've been approaching things from an ownership point of view, God, I pray that you would help us to make that mindset shift. God, and not only shift our minds, God, but then shift our behaviors to line up with our minds. That it might reflect the fact that we are followers of Jesus. God, give us the wisdom to do this. God, then this help us to follow through with that we might live lives pleasing to you. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.